Hi, Jaina.
Hi Z, how are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Not bad, thank you.
Cool. So we'll just wait for a few more people to join before we get this underway. And it seems like they are all joining. Please feel free to leave your comments in the little comment box down there. Any questions as well, and we'll try and get to some that we haven't answered during this live Q&A at the end. Okay, right. So, hi. So for those that don't know, Jaina is well, I'll let you introduce yourself. So Jaina, who are you and what do you do with Crohn's and Colitis UK?
Thanks, Z. So yes, I'm Jaina. I'm the Knowledge and Evidence Manager at Crohn's and Colitis UK. So what that means is me and my team are responsible for all the information about the conditions that you see on our website, you may have seen in your hospitals as well. So normally we're producing lots of varied things to help you manage your conditions, stuff about drugs and symptoms and everyday life. But for about the past year or so, we've pretty much been solely devoted to bringing you the latest coronavirus information and vaccines in particular this year.
Yeah, so well, the whole pandemic took everyone by surprise. Well, it certainly took me by surprise as well. And I think what shocked everyone was how drastically our lives changed due to lockdowns and restrictions, and everyone everywhere has been impacted in one way or another. But those of us with chronic illnesses, not just Crohn's and colitis, but those who are immunosuppressed or coming off immunosuppressants or are on different types of medications, were asked to shield. And that must have been so scary, knowing that there was an increased risk of contracting coronavirus and possibly, dying from it, to be perfectly honest and morbid. But we have a vaccine now, which is literally amazing. And because of that, there have been lots and lots of questions. I know I've received lots of questions about the vaccine, and I'm sure you've received hundreds as well, being the main charity for Crohn's and colitis. So how about we just get started into all of these questions?
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, as you said, we've been receiving so many questions about the vaccine through our helpline. So yeah, good to get some misconceptions busted as well.
Definitely. So I think the first question I've got here is probably the most obvious one, is the COVID vaccine safe to take if you have IBD? Well, as the vaccine is relatively new, there is no overall data on the long-term effects of the vaccine, but any vaccine that is given here in the UK, so everything that we're going to be speaking about is here in the UK. So I know there are lots of people joining us from America and different countries. So everything here in the UK has to be given approval by the Medicine and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, or MRHA. And these vaccines, they can't get that. They can't get that approval if they haven't done clinical trials, and if those clinical trials weren't successful and have provided safe and effective results. So in short, yes, it is safe, but it's too early to tell what the long-term effects are, if there are any. And if you are under 16 and have other underlying health conditions or are going through, say, transplants or something, then it is important to discuss your situation with your healthcare team before having the vaccine or being offered the vaccine.
Absolutely. And I would just add that for anyone who is worried about the long-term effects of the vaccine, while it is of course true that we haven't been able to test it years in advance, we also don't know what the long-term effects of catching coronavirus will be. I'm sure lots of you have heard about people suffering really badly from long COVID. So
Yeah,
only way out of the pandemic is taking this leap of faith and just trusting in the process that these vaccines have been developed in the safest possible way.
definitely. Next question is from, I'll keep all the questions anonymous. I think that'll be the the best bit. So why were the vaccines developed so quickly? Yeah, I think this took a lot of people by surprise because within, I don't know, maybe 9 months, we had a vaccine, or there were information about a vaccine being developed and putting through to trials. So To have some knowledge of vaccines, most vaccines are made using chicken eggs or mammalian cells that help the virus grow, and the normal processes involved in that can take up to 10 years to develop, and you need to develop a weakened or destroyed version of that disease or virus that causes that disease, which is why it takes a long time, because you need to develop enough of the right strain that will be able to help your body produce specific antibodies so that when you get infected with that disease, your body can then learn to help fight it off. Now, these need to be tested in clinical trials, which do require ethics approval, which is such a long process. And sometimes what is developed first time round doesn't provide enough protection or doesn't work at all. And so the whole process has to start all over again, which is why it takes so long. Now, as far as my understanding goes, because COVID was such a serious infection and the global pandemic, not only was a lot of money thrown at developing a vaccine, but all the processes such as ethical approval for trials were all streamlined. Now, the COVID vaccines, such as the Pfizer-BioNTech and the Moderna vaccine, they are mRNA vaccines. Now, you may have to go back to your biology lessons to remember what mRNA is, and it stands for messenger ribonucleic acid. And what that is, it helps our cells use that mRNA as a template to make certain proteins. Now, these vaccines are made from the DNA of COVID in the lab, which is a much quicker process and can take just roughly over a week to generate enough batches that can be tested. And so unlike conventional vaccines made from eggs that can take months, using mRNA vaccines are much quicker. So now, because mRNA vaccines use synthetic production methods, this actually means the actual virus is not needed to make a batch of the vaccine. And so this offers scientists and all these big companies that you hear much more flexibility and a quicker approach to creating vaccines that work. So yeah, basically, because it's an mRNA vaccine, you can create multiple strands really quickly, do testing really quickly, and because of all the ethics processes were all streamlined, they were able to do human trials much more quickly than, say, using a vaccine developed from eggs. Long-winded, but we got there.
No, that was a really good explanation. And I'd also add that while obviously COVID-19 is a new disease, coronaviruses in themselves have been around for a very long time. So scientists have been studying for quite a long time things like SARS and the best way to protect against that. So a lot of the groundwork had already been done, which gave us a really good.
Yeah. Question 3, how do these vaccines work? Okay, so as mentioned, they are an mRNA vaccine. So essentially there are 3 types or brands, so to speak. So you have the Pfizer-BioNTech, the Moderna, and the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccines. Now, they all do the same thing, which is to provide you with protection from COVID, and all 3 require you to have 2 doses between 3 and 12 weeks apart. But the way they work and how they are all stored varies. So the Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna vaccines, as mentioned, they are mRNA vaccines. So these vaccines use a copy of a messenger RNA from the virus to produce an immune response by giving the cells of our body the necessary instructions to make the spike protein that's found in COVID that can help our body recognize this protein to help fight it off. So once you've been given the mRNA vaccine, it enters your immune cells, which use that code to produce the spike protein. And once that is done, the cell then breaks down and gets rid of the mRNA. What happens next is the spike protein that has been made is displayed on the surface of your cells, and our immune system recognizes that that protein shouldn't be there, and so starts making antibodies to destroy it. And then that's how your body learns how to protect against future infections. So that was the Pfizer-BioNTech. Okay, so the Oxford-AstraZeneca, so much to remember here. The Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine, it uses a non-replicating adenovirus vector. So this is an inactivated virus that is just being used to transport the spike protein of coronavirus into the cells. And once that is into the cells, the same process happens, and then that's how the body can help recognize the spike protein and provide immunity to coronavirus, basically.
Good explanation.
Anything to add to that, or have I just made everyone fall asleep?
No, I think that's a really good explanation. And I think it's probably helpful to add here that, as you said, none of the available vaccines in the UK are considered live.
Mm.
If you take an immunosuppressant for your Crohn's or colitis, you've probably been told many times before that you can't have anything that's a live vaccine. And that's because live vaccines contained a weakened but still live form of the actual virus. And if your immune system's a bit lower, you might not be able to fight it off as well as other people who aren't taking immunosuppressants. But yes, important to remember, none of the vaccines are considered live. The Oxford one is a bit interesting because, as you said, it was originally based on what was a live vaccine, a live virus, but the researchers, when they were making the vaccine, they've changed it up so that it's not able to replicate when it gets inside your body. So that means that when it's actually delivered to you, the final product isn't considered live, and they've made it safe enough for as many people as possible to take, including those on immunosuppressants.
I suppose that brings the question of, can you have this? Can you have the vaccine if you are on immunosuppressants?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and understandably, lots of people are concerned about it because they have a weaker immune system. But yes, you absolutely can have it, and not only can you, you absolutely should. If your immune system is slightly weaker because of the medicines you take for your Crohn's or colitis, it's really important that you do have the vaccine so that you're as protected as possible. And that applies to if you're on a biologic like infliximab or adalimumab, or azathioprine or methotrexate, or a combination of both. No medicine for your Crohn's or colitis will stop you from taking it.
Yeah, and I think that's really important as well, because I know for me, I was on immunosuppressants for about 10 years, so I had no idea what effect the immunosuppressants were doing to my body. And I came off them a few years before, so I know myself was particularly worried about, being on the front line in the NHS and dealing with COVID. Yeah, so I know for me, with my past history of immunosuppressants, that was a big concern for me.
Yeah, because you've had your first dose, haven't you?
I have had my first dose, yes. I had it in January. Was it in January? Yes, it was in January. All the days have blurred into each other. I don't really know that we're in February anymore. Yeah, I had a first dose in January, and I'm waiting for my second dose appointment. Yeah. Next question. I wanted to travel before the pandemic, but wasn't allowed certain vaccines due to my medication. Why am I allowed the COVID vaccine and not some travel vaccines? Well, I think you also covered that in your previous response, Jana, but also the reason is some travel vaccines are live vaccines. And if you're on certain medications for Crohn's and colitis, your immune system is weakened. So if you're taking azathioprine or biologics, then you can't have these vaccinations. The COVID vaccine, as we mentioned, is not a live vaccine, so it's perfectly safe to have if you are on immunosuppressant medication. Will the vaccine work if I have IBD and if I am on immunosuppressants? Yes, it will work, but it will also depend on your IBD. So the vaccine has been tested extensively and has been given all the ethical approvals and the MHRA approvals that are needed. But if you're taking immunosuppressants for your IBD, then it's theoretically, now I'll stress this, it's theoretically, nothing has been proven, that it's possible that the vaccine will be less effective due to the medication you're on, because immunosuppressants suppress your immune system. And no vaccine is 100% effective, so there's no guaranteed in even a healthy person on no medication that they will have 100% protection. But yeah, as mentioned, all the vaccines have been given MHRA approval in the UK, and being on immunosuppressants is not listed as a reason not to be able to have the vaccine. Yeah.
And I know lots of people are probably really worried about the fact that their medicine might make the vaccine work less well, but I would say that it's really important that everyone keeps taking their medicine, because if you try to stop your medicine in order to make the vaccine work a little better, you're a pretty high risk of having a flare up. And if you do have a flare up, then you're at far higher risk of serious complications if you do catch coronavirus. And plus, immunosuppressants are very long lasting medications, so they will be staying in your body for up to 3 months after you stop taking it. So yeah, just like to say, really important that everyone keeps taking their medicines. And even if the vaccine does work slightly less well for you, they're still highly effective vaccines, much more effective than we have for flu. So even if you do unfortunately catch coronavirus after you have your vaccine, it's really likely that it'll be far less severe than it would have been if you hadn't been vaccinated.
Definitely, yeah. Next question on the list is there any research being done on the COVID vaccine and IBD? I suppose you can have a lot more information on this than I do, Jane, being more involved with the charity. But as far as I'm aware, there are 4 studies that are looking at not just the effects of COVID, but the socioeconomical and the mental health effects of COVID. So there's a study called Clarity that is looking into the development of antibodies of COVID and people with Crohn's and colitis here in the UK. There's another one by researchers at UCL, Great Ormond Street Institute of Child Health, I believe, that are looking at the behaviours of people who are 16 years and over about the pandemic and the public health strategies that have put in place to help tackle the pandemic, as well as another one called Secure IBD, and one being done at Manchester Royal Infirmary and University of Greenwich on people who have had shields during the pandemic, just to assess their experiences. What can you tell us more about all those studies?
Yes, so I know lots of people will be quite relieved to know that it is being looked into. And as you said, there are lots of studies going on in this area. So if you go to the Crohn's and Colitis UK website, we have lots of information about all the COVID studies that are taking place and how to take part in a few of them as well. So you can head over to our website. Yeah, the biggest one that's going to come out and hopefully report in the next couple of months is the Clarity study that you mentioned. So that's looking in particular at people with Crohn's and colitis who are taking either infliximab or vedolizumab and the other medications they take in combination with those. And they're looking to see if they are just as likely as the general population to develop antibodies after they've had COVID, even if they've not tested positive. And the next stage will be looking at antibodies after vaccination as well. So that the results from that will be really important to just informing what we know about how these medicines affect how the immune system works in relation to these viruses. And it'll be, yeah, a really important first step to understanding if there's a certain medicine that raises these concerns more than others.
I suppose it's not just important for the Crohn's and colitis community as well, because all the medications that we use, there's a lot of overlap with rheumatoid arthritis and some certain cancers and things such as methotrexate being used. So I suppose even though we'll have really good IBD specific data, it could potentially have a really important lessons for the whole chronic illness community and even those who don't suffer with chronic illnesses either.
Absolutely, it will have really far-reaching implications, so that's very exciting. And it's really great that obviously this coronavirus, it's been absolutely terrible, but it's a good opportunity to learn as much as we can from it.
Definitely. Next question is, which vaccine should I get? Well, I know as far as I'm aware, you actually have no choice of which vaccine you get. And I suppose it will depend on what is available in your local area and where you're getting it. I mean, I don't know about you, Jana, but when I got my vaccine, I got called to go to the local hospital. So in my mind, I already knew I was getting the Pfizer vaccine because that's the only place that can store it. I know some people have got theirs at their local GP, so that means they've got the Oxford AstraZeneca because it can be stored in a normal fridge.
Yeah, absolutely. So I also have ulcerative colitis, and I take azathioprine and a biologic called golimumab, which is similar to adalimumab. So I've also had the first dose of my vaccine. I did have the Oxford vaccine because I had it at my local pharmacy. So
And how were you afterwards? Did you have any side effects or?
yeah, so about for a day afterwards, I didn't feel great. I felt just a bit fluey and tired, but it passed really quickly. So it didn't last very long at all. And yeah, sore arm, all the usual stuff.
So yeah,
But
arm in a sling.
not that bad, thankfully. But yeah, it was definitely worth it. And I know lots of people have been a bit worried, in particular about the Oxford vaccine if you take immunosuppressants. So yeah,
Mm,
take all those drugs, and I had the Oxford vaccine, and I was absolutely fine. How did
that's
you
good
feel
to hear.
after?
I was fine, sore arm, but nothing to write home about, as they say. I was perfectly fine.
Not very eventful, is it? I went
I,
my mentor's thing. I was like, yeah, done in 3 seconds. Out you go.
I stayed in bed afterwards. I had my vaccine. It was halfway through the afternoon,
Okay.
and I stayed in bed like preparing for flu symptoms and everything. And then when I woke up the next day, absolutely fine. I'm like, oh, that was a bit disappointing.
No, but that's really good to hear.
It was, I don't know why, but after I had it, I had to, I think this goes really nicely into the next question is, why do I have to wait for 15 minutes after my jab?
Mm.
Um, so that is actually only relevant to the Pfizer vaccine. While it is safe to have the vaccine, some people have had allergic reactions to it, or in some very rare cases, they felt unwell and have fainted. And so the reason why you have to stay behind is if that happens to you, you can receive immediate medical attention. I know with me going in for my vaccine, I was, shouldn't have been on my phone and reading all these stories about people fainting and, needing immediate medical attention and things. So while I was sitting there, I was just like hyper aware of everything of my body. I'm like, am I meant to have fingers? Am I meant to have toes? Does this feel normal? And your mind does play tricks on you. But once you just kind of come back to reality, you realize that, you can actually work yourself into these things, especially when there's so much misinformation out there.
Absolutely. And I think that's something as a part of the Crohn's and colitis community, it's very easy to do even in normal times. You are just hyper aware of everything that's going on in your body, aren't you?
Definitely, yeah. I know with me and my Crohn's, one little twinge in my stomach, I'm like, okay, is this a flare? Or is this like a blockage? Do I need to go to A&E? What was happening? And yeah, honestly, listen to your body. If you haven't had the vaccine already, I'm sure you'll be fine. But I know there are guidelines on the NHS website what to do if you do experience symptoms afterwards. You're perfectly allowed to take paracetamol and treat it like a flu. Lots of bed rest and well, if you have Crohn's and colitis anyway, you should be resting as much as possible, especially with fatigue.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Get any side. It will be helpful if you can report them. So there's a in place called the yellow card scheme, and that allows you to report any side effects you get from any medication, or in this case, any vaccine. So yeah, if everyone does have any side effects, if they do report them, then we'll be able to get a larger picture about what side effects are common and if they affect some people more than others.
Definitely. Just looking at my list here. Where have we got up to? I haven't got my vaccine yet. What should I do as I can't get through to my doctors? Um, well, usually we can never get through to our doctors. Usually spending ages on hold. But so this applies only for people in England. If you are over 65 years old or yeah, so if you're over 65 years, you would have received or should have received a letter saying you're clinically extremely vulnerable, especially if you have Crohn's and colitis and are on immunosuppressant medications and things. And that letter will have instructions on whether you can book your vaccination appointment online. Um, if you are an NHS worker or a health or social care worker or considered frontline staff, talk to your line manager about getting vaccinated, because I'm sure they would have be in constant communication or receive communications from the government. But aside from that, I think it's just a wait and be contacted.
Yeah, obviously we know it's a very anxious time for people. Lots of people just want to get their vaccine as soon as possible. The really good news is that the rollout is progressing really well. So just remember that you will be called, you will have your vaccine in the coming months. You won't be forgotten about. So not everybody with Crohn's or colitis will be in one of the priority groups for vaccination. So like Ziad said, it depends on if you are taking medicines that weaken your immune system. And even then, not everyone who takes an immunosuppressant will necessarily be in clinically extremely vulnerable, which is priority group 4. But if you do take a medicine that impacts your immune system, you will be in priority group 6. So that's for people with health conditions that make them at moderate risk of complications from the virus. So everybody on an immunosuppressant, you are currently eligible to receive the vaccine. So if you haven't heard anything yet, Crohn's and Colitis UK, we have created a letter of support for GPs, and you can access that on our website, and that's just a helpful tool that you can download, send to your GP to explain what the criteria is for priority group 6, and just shows them how you meet that criteria by being immunosuppressed.
I suppose with the roadmap that's been set out, if you haven't heard when you're going to get your vaccine, I would assume it would be between now and the next 4 months. If we are going to supposedly come out and back to normality in 4 months, then you should have at least had your first dose for that to happen.
Yeah, the government is saying that all adults will be offered their first dose by the end of July. And so if you are on a medicine for your Crohn's or colitis, it's likely to be a lot sooner than that. But yes, it's progressing at a really good pace.
Next one is, why are 2 doses of COVID vaccine needed? Well, even though 1 dose of the vaccine can provide you with good protection, you basically need 2 doses to provide you with a stronger and longer period of protection. And especially if you are, say, on immunosuppressants, which weaken your immune system, the first dose may not be as effective. So you will require a booster, which is the second dose, to provide you with enough immunity if you are unfortunate enough to catch COVID.
Absolutely. And I think that's why it's really important that lots of people will have had their first dose by now, but far fewer people will have had their second. So it's still important to be careful and not consider yourself fully protected quite as yet.
What are the side effects of the COVID vaccine? Well, we did briefly touch upon this, but just like with Crohn's and colitis, it will vary between person to person because we are all different. As mentioned, I had my first dose and all I had was a sore arm. Most of the side effects of the vaccine are mild and should not last longer than about a week, I think they say. And it can include just your general flu-like symptoms, so feeling tired, headache, soreness, or feeling nauseous. Some may have a fever afterwards. It's perfectly acceptable to take paracetamol. Although feeling feverish is not uncommon even, for about 2 to 3 days, a high temperature is unusual and may indicate you have not necessarily COVID infection, but maybe another infection. So always follow up with your doctor, or in the UK, if you call the NHS 111 service, you'll be able to seek the best advice which has been put in place.
Absolutely. I think that covers everything.
Yeah. Can I get that? Can I get a COVID vaccine if I am allergic to eggs? Yes, as explained in the very beginning, the COVID vaccines are either mRNA or adenovirus vector vaccines. So they are not made by using eggs, such as other vaccines have been. So yes, you can have the vaccine if you have an egg allergy. If you're still unsure or concerned, always speak to your doctor or your IBD team. Anything to add to that, or?
No, just that they really have tried to make these vaccines available and suitable for as many people as possible. So there's actually very few reasons that would stop someone from having one of the COVID vaccines.
Okay, I just got distracted by reading the comments. Next one, following from the egg one, is the COVID vaccine halal, vegan, vegetarian friendly? Yes. So as mentioned previously, vaccine does not contain any eggs or animal products. So if you are vegan, vegetarian, or have other religious beliefs when it comes to certain meat requirements, then yes, they are halal, vegan, and vegetarian friendly. And I suppose this one was one for you, Jana, is can I have the vaccine if I already had COVID?
Sure, that's an interesting one. So I know a lot of people who have had COVID will think that they are protected already and might not need to have the vaccine. Current advice from the JCVI and the government is that yes, you can have it if you've had COVID, and you absolutely should. We don't know if having COVID once stops you from getting it again. So your vaccine is the best way we have of securing that more longer term protection. Caveat to that is though, if you've had COVID quite recently, then you may be asked to wait a certain amount of time before your vaccine just to make sure you're fully recovered. In most areas, this tends to be about 4 weeks or until you're feeling better.
Okay. Will the current vaccines work against the new strains of COVID? Okay, so this one's a bit of an iffy one because we actually don't know. So currently, experts say that the current vaccines are likely to offer protection from the new variants, but this is still being looked at. What I think is important to understand is that these vaccines are made to target certain areas of a virus. Now, experts in virology, they will always tell you that they have expected this virus to mutate or variants of COVID to occur because that is what viruses do. So even though we have heard about the new variants, so like the South African variant and the UK variant, I I want to say I believe, but I hope that there are things going on behind the scenes we're not aware of to tackle these new variants, so to speak.
Yeah, as you said, it's not a surprise at all that these new variants have come out. If you think of the flu vaccine, we need a new flu vaccine every year because it just mutates so quickly. So it is thought that hopefully the vaccines we have currently will be protective against new variants because they're all related to the same spike protein.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you've covered it all. Um, will the COVID vaccine make me unwell and my colitis flare up? That's a question for you. Yeah.
One. Yes, so obviously, as we've said, this will be different for everyone. There isn't currently any evidence to suggest that the vaccine will trigger a Crohn's or colitis flare up. What we do know is that some of the side effects from the vaccine, even from healthy people, can include things like nausea, vomiting, and gut problems as well. So if you do experience some of these, it might be just a side effect that will go away quickly rather than having an actual flare up of your Crohn's or colitis triggered. So hopefully it's just temporary, but obviously if you are worried, do report this to your IBD team and do report any side effects to the yellow card scheme as well.
I suppose with the vaccine, a lot of people have been um, worried that they are having the COVID virus and not, the mRNA strand to help protect against it. So the next question is, can you spread COVID if you've had the vaccine?
Interesting. So, yeah, as you said, it's not, you can't get coronavirus from having the vaccine. We don't fully understand the picture of how much it's still possible to pass on the virus, though. Recent data coming out from Oxford shows that the vaccine does reduce transmission, which is really, really good. But as we've said before, no vaccine is 100% effective for everybody. So it is absolutely still possible that you can still pass on coronavirus even if you have been vaccinated. Because if you have the vaccine, you might still get COVID, but as we've said, it's likely to be much less severe and probably and hopefully asymptomatic even. So you could be sort of a carrier for COVID, not feel anything yourself, but still pass it on. So until we know more, the government are still continuing to recommend that everybody follow social distancing rules.
I'm just looking through some of the comments here. There are lots of women who are pregnant and on immunosuppressants. Well, firstly, congratulations. And some of them are asking, can I have the COVID vaccine if I am pregnant or breastfeeding? So at the moment, there isn't enough evidence to say that the vaccine is unsafe if you're pregnant. Obviously, more evidence is needed before you can be routinely offered it, but there is a joint committee on vaccination and immunizations here in the UK, and they've advised that it's recommended that you will still be able to have the vaccine if you are pregnant. There are other certain criteria. So if you are pregnant and are at a higher risk of getting coronavirus, either because of where you work or what medications you're taking, or have a health conditions that mean you are more at a serious risk of complications of coronavirus, then you will be in one of those categories which you mentioned earlier, Jaina, to be offered the vaccine. And yes, if you are breastfeeding, you can still have the coronavirus vaccine. Again, with everything, if you are still concerned, speak to a healthcare professional or your doctor before you have the vaccination, and they will discuss the benefits and risks with you. You don't need to avoid, if you are trying to get pregnant, you don't need to avoid trying to get pregnant after your vaccination. And the vaccine cannot give you or your baby coronavirus. I think that's really, really important to say, because there's a few more questions in the question box saying, can my baby get coronavirus? Yes, if they contract it normally, but not through the vaccine if you are getting it.
Absolutely. And obviously it's a very personal decision if you choose to have the vaccine while you're pregnant. So yeah, do discuss that with your healthcare team.
Just still going through the comments. I have a J pouch. Can I still have the vaccine? Yes. So as far as I know, having a stoma or a J pouch will not stop you from being able to have the vaccine.
Yeah, absolutely. As we've discussed before, there are actually very few reasons that will stop you having the vaccine. So if you have a stoma or J pouch, definitely go ahead. Any of the available vaccines are suitable for you.
Can I have the vaccine if I am on steroids for my colitis? Yes.
Yeah,
Well, I'm assuming so, yeah.
yeah, you absolutely can still have the vaccine. It's perfectly safe. The only thing to consider is there's a chance that the vaccine might work slightly less well for you if you're on a higher dose of steroids. So talk to your IBD team. They might suggest that you wait until you've finished your course of steroids or have at least tapered down to a lower dose before you have your vaccine. But if that's not possible for you, then it's still absolutely safe. There's no problem to have them at the same time.
I am about to start vedolizumab. When should I have my vaccine? You briefly touched upon this before, but I'm assuming if you're on any biologics and concern, just speak to your healthcare providers.
Yeah, absolutely. So because we do know that immunosuppressants might make the vaccine work slightly less well. If you haven't started your vedolizumab yet, then speak to your healthcare team. It might be a good idea to try and get both of your vaccines in before you start, so that they can be as effective as possible. But obviously, talk to your healthcare team. You'll have to weigh up what's most important for you. So if you're in a really bad flare that needs controlling as soon as possible, then of course don't delay starting any treatment. But on the other hand, if you're working in an environment, for example, like in healthcare, where you're at quite a high risk of being exposed to COVID, then you might prioritize getting your vaccine as soon as possible. So yeah, this applies to if you haven't started your vedolizumab or any other biologic as yet, you might want to think about the timing. But if you are on vedolizumab already or any other medicine already, you can take the vaccine at any time during your medicine cycle.
And that answers the next question perfectly. Do I have to wait after I have my biologics and COVID vaccine? So you've answered that
Yeah.
perfectly.
So this one has been, I know there's been conflicting advice going around. So the British Society of Gastroenterology, they're sort of the leading society for gastro conditions, and they have a IBD section full of the top IBD doctors in the UK. And they've released a statement about the vaccine. And they have said that there's absolutely no need to time your vaccine around when you take your biologics. You can take them on the same day if you absolutely want to. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that at all. So we know in some hospitals, people are being told maybe to leave a few days gap, sometimes a week, sometimes 2 weeks. And that's more to do with the risk of side effects. So if you're likely to have side effects after your infliximab infusion, for example, you might want to give it a few days before you have your COVID vaccine, just so you're not sort of bombarded with side effects all of the time. And also so we know what's caused the side effects. So that would be the only reason for leaving a gap. Otherwise, it's the British Society of Gastroenterology have said it's absolutely safe to have them on the same day, and it's just as effective. It won't make it any less effective. I know a lot of people worry that if they're injecting or having their infusion, then their immune system drops that day. But the whole point of treatment is that you have a good level of the medicine in your blood at all times, so it won't really make that much difference. And there is evidence from what we know from the flu vaccine to show that it doesn't make a difference for people on anti-TNFs to have their medicine at the same time as the flu vaccine.
Brilliant. And the last question I have on my list before we go on to some of the comments we've been receiving. I have been shielding in the lockdown, so does having the vaccine mean I can stop? People that have been told to shield, a lot of, when I've mentioned this to people, they've seemed quite surprised, but when you've been deemed a higher risk of getting COVID and you were told to shield, this wasn't actually an enforced law. So this wasn't law, but a recommendation to ensure your safety. So if you've had the vaccine and you're deemed clinically vulnerable, it is really your decision if you want to keep shielding or not, but you would still need to follow the legal restrictions within your area. I know we're in a lockdown now, but whether we go to back to the tier systems after lockdown, I don't know. But if you've had the vaccine and have been told to shield before, you don't have to shield if you feel like you don't want to, but please obey the law.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as you had said, as long as you're following the law, shielding was always optional. The guidance from the government is that you should still continue to shield, just because we don't know how well the vaccine stops you, A, from passing it on to other people, and B, especially if you're on immunosuppressants, if it'll work quite as well for you. And again, most people will have only had their first dose. So yeah, it is absolutely optional, but it is recommended that you continue to just act as if you haven't had it as yet, essentially, and disobey the same law rules and just take all the same precautions that you would have before.
Definitely. So I'm just going through some of the comments now. Are GPs processing through their vaccine lists at a different rate, e.g. moving house to a different GP may get vaccines sooner than expected? Um, I don't know, but I assume if you are moving house, then you would, if you've gone out of the area of your local GP, you would have to register with your new GP, and that may take um, time to allow your registration to go through. And it would really depend. I think at the moment now they are just literally going through the list of patients and calling people to see when they're available for the vaccine.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is true that different areas are slightly ahead of others.
Definitely. So most of these we have actually covered. So
Very comprehensive.
we, yeah. So before we finish up, I've got a few questions for you, Jana, in terms of what was it like um, at Crohn's and Colitis HQ when the pandemic started? That must have obviously been a bit hectic to go through, especially when it was told lockdown, everyone work from home, and then I'm sure you were inundated with so many questions about not only the coronavirus, but then eventually the vaccine.
Absolutely. So the good thing was at Crohn's and Colitis UK, we were already quite well set up to work from home. So we all had remote things like laptops and headsets. So I think we were all a bit surprised at how seamless it was. We all transitioned quite well to working from home. The biggest thing is that our finances did take quite a big hit. Obviously, one of our biggest income generators is putting on great events for you guys like Walk It, which obviously now couldn't happen. So we did see a big decrease in our income. We did have to utilize the furlough scheme, the job retention scheme, and we're a slightly differently structured charity now as well. So yeah, we've been through a lot of changes in the last year, and yeah, that it was very, very intense when coronavirus hit. All of our supporters were understandably very concerned. Our helplines calls to the helplines increased by about 400%, I think, at the height of the pandemic.
Wow.
Yeah, and we had about 6 times as many viewers to our website than we normally do. So lots of people looking for answers, and as you'll all remember, things were changing so quickly.
Constantly, yeah.
So it was definitely a lot to keep up with everything and make sure that we were getting all the most up to date information for you guys as soon as we can. So all of our information, we work very closely with the British Society of Gastroenterology, who I've mentioned already, and they're the ones who developed the risk grid to class how vulnerable a person with Crohn's or colitis is to COVID. So we are working with them really closely to make sure everything we tell you is as accurate and up to date as possible.
How difficult was that in terms of receiving ever changing information? Because I remember at the start of the pandemic, we would have a little huddle before the start of the day. So we would receive the updates on COVID. Then we would, go off to our little areas where we need to be, whether it was surgery, A&E, and covering whatever needs to be covered in the hospital. I know for me, it was so challenging from day to day to have been told you can do this from one day, but then the next day it's completely changed. You have to do something else. So how difficult was it to actually put up a piece of information on the website and then maybe, a few hours later we have to change it because, constantly new information was coming in.
Yeah, as you say, it was a lot to get your head around. And I think maybe we're a smaller charity than I think people sometimes realize we are. So my team, who's responsible for all of the information content you'll see on our website, we're about 2.5 people, full-time equivalent. So yeah, definitely was a lot to cope with. And yeah, as you said, things were needed updating like hourly, if that. And obviously, so we've got to digest the information, make it into something usable for the website, also brief our helplines team so they can walk callers who call in through it all. So yeah, it was very, very intense. And like I said before, we did have to stop everything else that we were doing. So normally we've known Ziad for quite a while because he's one of our volunteers and he helps us write our information, which is really fantastic. So he'll sort of know a bit more about what we go through on a day-to-day basis. We're always updating our regular information, like our drug treatment sheets and our stuff about food and symptoms. So all of that, we just had to make the decision to put it to one side and just really focus on what our supporters needed the most, which was COVID info.
And would you say getting up-to-date and accurate COVID info was the biggest challenge the charity faced, or were there other bigger challenges you all faced?
Yeah, I think, mainly it was having enough people and enough funds to keep going and do everything we needed to do. Because like I said, our income absolutely plummeted. And so we really had to think about what we could still afford to do. But at the same time, people were relying on us more than ever. And we knew we needed to be there for everyone with Crohn's or colitis. And so, we're emerging from it all now, and hopefully 2021 we're a slightly different organization, but hopefully still meeting your needs and doing everything we can to support everybody with Crohn's and colitis.
And you mentioned how funds plummeted, and a lot of, I don't think a lot of people realize in terms of charities like these how a membership subscription or a donation here and there really do help, and things like, as you mentioned, the war kit, and I remember the wellness days we used to do here at the Berkshire Network help get additional funds and everything. Are you hopeful that these events will come back, and we can have a war kit again and have all these local network events in the future?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think we've all learnt so much from the pandemic in terms of how things can manage virtually. And our local networks, we did a pilot scheme last year where we ran virtual social events, and those went really well. We were able to reach people that we never would have been able to reach when we had to make people come to a physical event. Because obviously if you have Crohn's or colitis, it's really unpredictable. You might some days not be able to travel far or get out of the house. So I think we've learned a lot from that. And as well with Walk It, we know how important that community spirit is to our supporters. But at the same time, we launched a virtual Walk It where people could go at their own route, at their own time and their own pace. So they could choose when they started and how much they did in a day. And we found people really enjoyed that flexibility. So I guess it's still too early to say what this next year will of. Will stuff like Walk It be allowed again in time for the summits? I guess still too early to say, but we have learned lots of lessons from the virtual events that we did last year.
Brilliant. Just looking through some of the comments, lots of people saying thank you. Very informative chat, excellent, clear and coherent information. Well done to you both. Thank you both. Thank you guys. So lots of people very appreciative. All I can say is I hope that has been really helpful for you all, and thank you so much, Jaina, for joining me on this and helping me answer all these questions. And thank you everyone for tuning in, and hope we haven't made you fall asleep.
No, thanks so much for having Crohn's and Colitis UK on. It's always we always love the opportunity to talk about this stuff and make sure everyone has accurate information. So if you do have any other questions about the vaccine, you can go to crohnsandcolitis.org.uk, and we've got lots of information there to hopefully answer your questions.
And lots of people asking where they can get that information sheet you mentioned. I will put all the links on my story with a swipe up link, so you all can access it, and I'm sure Jaina will do the same.
Absolutely, yes.
Brilliant. Hopefully we can bring you more of these talks on different topics. I know I really enjoy giving up my time to help the charity. Obviously it's something that's close to my heart, being a crony, as they say. But hopefully we can bring you more of these talks in the future and do more live Q&As for you all. Brilliant. So thank you so much for joining me, Jaina, and hopefully we'll see you and everyone else in person.
Yes, hope so. Yeah, thanks.
Hope so.
It was great to be here. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.